All right, I'm Jack Donovan, and this is PH2T3R, Pater. And I'm here today to talk about fatherhood, but I actually don't talk about fatherhood. I can talk about the concept of fatherhood, what it means in a big picture, but I don't have any kids. So I try not to talk about the nuts and bolts of fatherhood, but I'm here with three members of the Order of Fire, and they all are fathers. And so we're going to talk about fatherhood today because it's a really important subject that they can, kind of bounce ideas back and forth. And, a lot of guys are actually, have new kids, are trying to figure this out for themselves. And, there's no really good guidebook for today. So it's good to actually get feedback from other dads as well. So I guess I should start out by introducing you guys, right? That would make sense. Austin, if you don't know, wrote a book called Solar Sun. And it's fantastic. I was trying to I thought I had a hard copy of it today that I was going to hold up, but I realized that when I actually first encountered it for real was when it was Paul's reading of it. And I sat and listened to Paul read it like the first time. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is exactly what this book is exactly what it should be. And so it was really fantastic. So it was Paul's reading of it, which you guys can find on Instagram. I believe through, their site, and we can put a link up as well. But can you show us the book there? I think you were holding it up, weren't you?
Yeah, I got it right here. If I can get it right.
There you go. There you go. So, all right. So I guess I'm going to start off with Austin. So that's Austin. He's the author of Solar Sun. And then we have Mr. Josh Wood from lovely Tasmania. Coach Josh Wood, who's you can find him on Instagram and a whole bunch of other places. We'll put some links up there as well. And he's a trainer and among many other things. Obviously also a dad. And then we also have Chris Robertson, our philosopher, electrician, who has all kinds of interesting things to say about all kinds of different things all the time. I think it's because you listen to so many podcasts and stuff while you're driving to work and working. Cause I'm like, how is he thinking about all this stuff all the time? But I imagine you have some time where you can listen to stuff all day. So you're always coming up with new ideas. But he's obviously also a father. So I just wanted to get it started with that. So why don't we start off with you, Austin? Obviously what got you started writing? He said, hey, I want to write a children's book. Because that's something by itself. That's a tricky thing to do.
Yeah, it's definitely was never on my bucket list. I started messing around with the AI art and decided I wanted to kind of put a story to that. And I really liked your article, Stay Solar, all about the solar idealism thing. And I was like, hey, this would be a really cool thing to teach my kids. How could we, turn this into a concept that they can understand? And just through meshing a story between a boy and his dad talking about solar idealism, with the AI art, all of a sudden, I got a children's book out of it. So it turned out pretty cool.
That's fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about the story arc? I mean, I don't think you're going to ruin it because we're not kids, so we're not the intended audience. So hey, can you tell us exactly what happens in the story?
Yeah. So the main story, it's about this boy and he's going on a hike with his dad and he's pretty little. Probably, if I had to guess 6 or 7-ish, but, he's doing these things like, he gets out of the truck and it's cold and dark outside and his dad's giving him, warmth and light. And, then as he's hiking, he's noticing all these things about the world around him and how the sun's affecting him. And, his dad's giving him advice along the way. And then eventually they reach the camp that they're getting to where their grandfather's waiting for them. And they kind of have a moment around the campfire and just kind of talk about, some of the symbolism of the fire and, how they create that world for themselves, in the chaos and darkness. And then the grandpa gives him some knowledge of his own and kind of, shows the legacy between grandpa to dad to son and, ends with the boy dreaming about eagles. So.
Yeah, no, I love the way that you put all the subjects together and made them flow and into something simple that people would actually do. People would actually take their son on a hike to go start a fire with grandpa.
Right.
It's very accessible and very real. So really cool book. Anyone who's obviously has kids and they're interested in some of the subjects that we talk about, staying solar or any of that, you can definitely check out the book Solar Sun, and I think it's well worth it. I think both you guys have it at your houses as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you were saying that your son actually requests it on a regular basis, I believe.
Yeah, he's recently just really read it to him a few times. So he's 2.5, and now he'll come up to me like, I'm Dada. So Dada, read Solar Sun. We read Solar Sun. Like, sure, bud. We could read Solar Sun. It's the cutest thing in the world.
That's fantastic.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
And he's learning lessons from it, because the other day in the car, he was digging in his ear, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, getting earwax. I'm like, oh, what's that for? He's like, protect against soaring eagles, and the sun is a ball of gas. I'm like, all right, buddy. Straight from the book.
Earwax, yes.
That's awesome.
You'll go far.
He will. Smart kid.
Very cool. Very cool. So anyway, let's get into a discussion on fatherhood, and I'm just going to let you guys run with it. This was a good question to start with. Like, how would you say each of you how would you say that fatherhood has changed you?
Oh boy,
How hasn't it?
Sort of my thoughts as well. Yeah. It sort of reorients your priorities in a lot of ways. You had an idea of what you wanted to do with your life as a single guy, and that was, is at least tacitly for a lot of people, it was for me anyways, as an individual. And then once you don't just have a spouse but also kids, suddenly you have to think in terms of their interests, because they're literally your legacy, and you have responsibilities. If you don't change their diaper, if you don't feed them, they don't feed themselves. And it actually pulls you out of your own thinking fairly regularly.
Yeah, I'd have to say along those same lines, the biggest thing it does is contextualizes everything else. Like, until you have something that is that important in your life, you haven't really discovered things like duty and the powerful responsibility that you have for another life that you created. Like, it's just the context that it gives everything. Like, everything you do, that the time you spend on it has to be worth it, because you've got a tiny living thing that's dependent on it.
Well, how about you, Austin?
I was just going to say, for me, I think back on all the things my dad told me. And as a kid, you have no clue why he's telling you these certain things, or why things have to be a certain way. And all of a sudden you're a dad and you're telling your kid all those same things, because like you said, you're now responsible for this being and trying to get it, to launch, get them out of the nest. And all those things that you were told growing up now all of a sudden make sense. And
yeah,
it's like, crap, dad was right,
Yeah. And it's funny how it's never believed at the time that you hear it, right? There's a whole category of speeches and phrases, the line like "they grow up so fast" comes to mind. That
say it all the time.
As a kid, you hear that. As a teenager, even your early 20s, you hear that and you're like, that's such a trite platitude that doesn't mean anything. It's just something people say to pass the time. And then you actually experience it and you're like, I get it. I didn't get it before. I see what they were talking about. And you want to pass that on to the young people, and they're not going to believe it.
It's a circle.
But I do think it's still worth saying, because they'll have that moment where they recognize it later, even if they don't get it the first time. So
yeah, and I definitely think
everything
that
does.
Absolutely. I definitely think that, there's so many things that happen, and I'm like, someday they're going to realize how hard this was as a parent for me to pull off for them, or from me and my wife to pull off so that they could have the life that they have. But they're not going to know until they have kids of their own. And they're like, oh man, like this was hard. I'm really grateful mom and dad did this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of the full circle of things though, isn't it? Like how many thousands or hundreds of millions of times has this exact conversation happened? Like how many dads across time have been like, oh, my parents weren't idiots. Oh, they do grow up so fast.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's no other way to say it than that.
No, there isn't.
You can try, but yeah. And it is interesting also, once you become a father, it reminds you of, views you had of your father that you had as a kid, but that you'd kind of forgotten about. Like it didn't really occur to me until I had kids of my own. And, I get home from work and I hear my wife telling the kids about, oh, daddy got up really early so he could go to work and blah, blah, blah. And, it occurred to me just how much I had admired my father for waking up at 4:30 in the morning every day when I was a kid. It seemed superhuman to a child who had a hard time waking up before 7, partially because kids need more sleep, but still it feels incredible and something aspirational, this larger than life person who's able to do these things. And it gets relegated to somewhere in the back of the mind, I guess, and being around kids sort of brings it back to the forefront again.
For sure. And I'd say from my experience too, that idea, that sort of looking up to and admiring your dad, your father, and then kind of remembering about that now that we're adults with their own kids, it makes me want to live up to that, to earn that little bit of hero worship that your kids have. And like, they're going to do it anyway, but I want to look back and say, maybe I earned it a little bit.
Yeah.
So here's an exercise that, I've thought about often is trying to remember the earliest moment of my dad and how old he was, and then where I'm at today in relation to that. You know what I mean? Like I go back to like 6, 7 years old and I'm like, oh my gosh, like my dad was in his 30s and that's where I was at just a little bit ago. And then trying to remember like what that was like. And now I'm living the same thing that he just did.
Yeah, that's a fun one. I'm older than my parents were.
Yeah, it is odd to be like, it's one thing to be a parent and you have this, living potato that needs its diapers changed approximately every 30 seconds. But it's something else when you're realizing, oh gosh, they're at the age or even beyond the age that I can remember my first memories. So they're going to remember the things that I'm doing for the rest of their life. That realization itself is kind of reorienting.
It's interesting.
In a very powerful way.
It is. And it's interesting to use that sort of as a measure of time. Like you can kind of measure the history of humans in how many people have had that exact experience. How many times has that happened since the beginning of humans?
Yeah.
Like it just
generations.
Yeah, that's it. It always just makes me think. It's kind of like being around mountains or huge trees or the ocean, and that kind of, again, context, like understanding you're just this blip, but you got to do what you can as that blip for the other little blips around you.
Yeah. There are some fun writers who will use, instead of years or seasons or moons, they'll use generations. I think J.R. Tolkien does this. So many generations of men had passed before such and such new event came along. And it is interesting as you get older to see your time horizons expand and think instead of years in terms of generations. And certainly, fatherhood isn't the only way to do that. There are people who, write books or compete in certain events that are trying to define an era or to have an impact in that way. But fatherhood sort of drags you into that, whether you want to or not, and brings you into that kind of time space.
Yeah, I've definitely become more aware of time and it kind of comes back to they grow up so fast. You know, like every time I say it, I'm like, oh shit, when did I say that last? Like a week ago. He's already taller. He's already got new words. He's already causing more chaos. And it just happens so quick. And then it's like yesterday he was this big. Now he's this big. Just messes your whole sense of time up, but then also makes it all the more important and relevant.
Exactly. Yeah. Our 1-year-old has just today, in fact, we realized she has a thing for wearing shoes inside. And it just like a month ago, you don't think of a 1-year-old as even really having, my wife does, as having a personality. But at the moment they express very clear preferences for that drink, not that, and I want to wear shoes, and then just lounge around in their shoes. It's like the change becomes an unavoidable. You have to notice this in your life. It imposes itself on your experience in a way that sort of keeps you in the physical world in a way that I think is valuable in this more digital age. We say on a podcast, but still.
I say my 2-year-old started swearing a couple months ago. I'm like, it's a little too much personality. Turn that down a little bit. I don't know where she learns that shit from.
But. They learn everything. They listen to everything. They take it in. You just say something under your breath, and 3 weeks later, it's gonna come back at you. They're just sponges.
Yeah, but some of it seems to be innate as well. My wife and I experimented with a discipline technique, because we're not totally averse to spanking, but it's easy to overdo. And I was like, what if I threaten the kids if they do something wrong, I'll spank their mother. And it sounded extremely clever at the time, and we actually followed through with it. And it turned out to be a horrible idea. It was a terrible idea. 4-year-old daughter thought it was kind of weird, funny, like, oh, that's so. 2-year-old son, violently enraged. He had such a strong sense of justice. He came over and attacked me in defense of his mother, which you're kind of like,
wow,
come on, kid. Like, you're 2, I'm 32. It's not going to work out for you. But it's admirable as well. And you're like, what a great little kid for standing up for his mother like that in the face of injustice. Mom is being punished, so he thinks, for something that he did. It was actually kind of touching, but I don't think we taught him that in any ways. It just sort of emerged spontaneously. So we don't do that anymore.
Lesson learned, huh?
Just recreationally.
Not in front of the kids.
Oh boy, that's an interesting one.
That's interesting. So I guess I thought this was an interesting question that somebody came up with, was because we kind of polled some guys from the group originally, and I do think this is something that you encounter, and especially with how this is something I would wonder, frankly. It's with how kind of messed up things are right now. There are certain people who would say oh, how can you bring a kid into the world, blah, 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 blah. Right. And that's for whatever reasons they have. And then even for the rest of us who are just well, things are really weird right now. And there's a lot of confusion about the future. I mean, what do you guys think about that? Because you have to take on a different mindset than I do. My mindset can go to a different place. But you're well, I have these kids that I don't want to die, and that have to have a future, and I have to give them a vision and a dream for the future. How do you how are you processing all that, and how do you process that decision?
You have to be an apocalyptimist. I think that's what that's called. No matter what's coming, you're gonna make it work. Doesn't matter, and you got to show them as a dad that as a dad, you got to show them that life's going to prevail no matter what.
Yeah. Well, and what's considered optimistic changes a lot based on what your ideal of the good life is, right? There are probably tens of millions of people in America whose dream is that it all comes crumbling down. Like that's their best case scenario.
Mhm.
The idea that it would carry on in this way with approximately this level of employment and crime and so forth is like that's what they're dreading. That's what they don't want their kids to experience. And they take their kids out into the mountains to get them away from that. So, what your ideal of the good life is going to shape whether it's responsible or not to bring a kid into this world. But as far as hope goes, you pick a century in history and you can find horrors beyond the comprehension of your average college liberal as far as what they would experience. Reading about just recently the Black Plague, that's pretty brutal. It's maybe unbeatable in terms of like act of God wiping out huge portions of the population. You read a little bit about the Chinese civil wars that dominated most of their history. Our century is pretty, if you're looking for peace and prosperity and stability, our century might be one of the best on record so far. We'll
So what
things
you're saying
still
is
have
We're in.
Yeah.
Early days.
I would say like the
still,
last 50 years was pretty solid.
yeah, we still have
you know.
plenty of time to get back to historical normals. But I mean, then we're a normal,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where's this expectation of, eternal progress and peace coming from? And what does that have to do with responsibility? And also responsible to whom is an important question.
It's a good point. I've had a lot of interactions with those on the more hippie side of the spectrum due to working as a wilderness guide and getting all the eco hippies, and then being in health sciences, getting all the health hippies.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We all have our challenges. And it's one of those things where it's usually young people in their late teens, early 20s. They're like, I can never bring a child into this world. Oh my God, the way things are. And I think exactly what Chris said, have you ever opened a history book? But also, it's like, I say, well, what do you want the future to look like? And it's always something better. It's like, well, how are you going to invest or change the future by copping out? Like, you're taking the coward's route. And I think of this as, it's the idiocracy principle. If you don't create things like children who are better than you and better than their predecessors, who can go into the future and change the future, all the people who are not going to put in that effort are going to keep producing offspring that are going to change the future to what they're going to change it to. It's idiocracy. It's real. And so if you want to change the future, you have to invest in the future. That means having kids, raising them well, teaching them things like critical thinking and how to be resilient, be good people, and look after the world around them and their friends and their family. And you have to invest in that. And if you don't get a say in the future.
Yeah, and a lot of those the women especially, but some of the men too, are just rationalizing. Like I was out a couple years ago wingmanning for my brother-in-law at a bar, and there was this woman we're sitting next to, and she was talking about how she didn't have any kids and she didn't want any kids. And I, at some point, brought my wedding ring hand onto the table, and I said, "Oh yeah, some people. I've got 2 kids at the time, and they're great, they're awesome." And she changed her mind on how much she wanted kids in 30 seconds flat. She's like, "Oh yeah, kids are so great." And it was very, And my wife knew a number of people when she was growing up who were in sort of the she calls it the lesbian cult in the Girl Scouts, sort of an open secret in that world. And many of them who are avowed lesbians in their late teens are, now that they're in their late 20s, married with 2 or 3 kids or 4 kids or something with a guy that they absolutely adore. And it's like so many of the people who have this, I couldn't bring kids into this world, just haven't met someone that they could imagine bringing kids into the world with.
It's a good point.
100%.
There's there's definitely something to that. Like when you find the person, like it's just like, I don't know, biology kicks in, takes over. And it's like, okay, this is what we're supposed to do. This is kind of what we evolved to do, isn't it? You know, you're basically having to fight that all your life until you're like, oh, I can't do that anymore. And you find that person or whatever situation you find yourself in. And you're like, oh, this is kind of what we were made to do, isn't it?
Yeah. My mother-in-law, I won't go into too much detail to preserve her privacy, but she's a teacher, and she gets higher level. She was getting questioned by an uppity student who thought she knew a lot, and the student said, well, society teaches people, women, that we need to have all these kids and stuff. And my mother-in-law said, no. Biology tells you that you need to have all these kids. Society tells you you don't. And it totally inverted her like pseudo red pill, the conspiracy theory from, feminist stuff to keep society tells us to do this. It's like, no, this is what every other organism does. This is what your body tells you to do. And only now have we had these theories that are now arguing the other way.
That's pretty
kind of the same with, it's the same with masculinity too, right? Like the tactical virtues, strength, it's not needed to get through modern society. Society doesn't need it. You have to choose it. You have to work for it. If you want the world that you want, you want to see the future be different than the now.
Exactly. And as with the female stuff, society tells you you don't need to be strong, and some ways incentivizes that, but your biology still tells you you want to be strong.
It does.
Yeah, well, I mean, the people who are saying those kind of things, a lot of times what they're being taught is that human nature isn't real, and that's that whole blank slate thing that, like, that really it kind of comes out of Marxism, but that's a different topic that we all know about.
Yeah. Well, but it is worth bringing up, because the question about responsibility is often framed in terms of environmental stuff. Right. And they'll say it's not just how can you bring kids into this world of suffering, which is like a very old kind of theological thing, but like, how could you do damage to the environment by multiplying the number of kids? And it is worth asking, like, who are you trying to be responsible to? Who is your loyalty to? Is it the earth? You have loyalty to the earth, do you? Or are you being influenced by something else? When you dig down to where should your responsibilities lie, to whom specifically, there's no deeper bedrock than your family, and specifically the responsibility you have to the people who brought you into this world, which are your parents. And I can't see an argument where some external loyalty outside of that trumps that responsibility and burden and purpose as something worthwhile to do.
No, absolutely. I think a lot of people, I mean, I don't really pay attention to those people as having like a real argument or souls. But it's honestly, just as an outsider, I mean, obviously this is not on the table for me anyway, so it's not really a big concern. But what I would think of is more the idiocracy argument that Josh brought up, is that as the person who it feels responsible, like, I think that kids should have this, and this, and how am I going to get those things? I think is more what I think a lot of people, because, if you're like, we need to save the world and all that, that's a different like mindset. They aren't listening to this podcast, like they hate us. But like if you're a guy who, like, is just who wants to be responsible as far as like a responsible father, like I want to do the right things, in the terms of, I think, maybe now a lot of people are like, college education is kind of bullshit and overrated for most people and all that. But, a while ago, I mean, when I was growing up, it was like, how are you going to pay for these kids' college? Like that was what a lot of people were thinking, like how could you possibly pay for like whatever, like, I mean, when I went to school, I mean, I think I left with like
put them in trade school.
Yeah, well, no, for sure. That's the correct answer.
Legit.
But like a lot of people, like I think when I went to college, I think I left with like $12,000 of debt. But like, because that was in the 90s. But then like, jump forward 15 years and people were like $120,000 of debt or what, like just insane amounts that seem insurmountable. And so like I think a lot of people that was the idiocracy argument, was like, like the smart people were thinking like, we can't possibly afford children because there are so many like responsibilities. And then like Flo and Jimmy Bob down, are like are throwing down as they're throwing beer bottles at each other and making babies right and left. So that I think that's what probably a lot of people would also think about, rather than the responsibility to Gaia or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and there's also, if you're a particularly thumotic man, it might be worth remembering, like, where if you feel some patriotic duty, it is worth remembering that Islam is expanding by having lots and lots and lots of kids. And no matter how many wars we may or may not win, or not, perhaps likely, winning would be meaningless if we just demographically disappear. Culturally, culture is passed on through family. That's why we still speak English in many cases. And the best way to preserve what you like in your culture is to preserve the future of that, which I think is something Josh was bringing up before as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. We pass on traditions. We passed on history and stories and ways of being. I think those connections are most strong in families. Like, you can say join a cult and pick up a tradition there, or you can join a religion or whatever it is. But the things that you were raised with, especially through your developmental years, you never forget them. Like, I was raised in a highly Christian Midwest household, and it's like those lessons and those Sunday schools and Bible teachings and studies, I remember most of them. And I haven't touched that stuff in 20 years, but it's always there. That's the stuff I learned when I was growing up, and it doesn't change.
No, for sure. I mean, you get, and it also, for better or worse, depending on who's doing the raising, it also does form the character of the people more than you think. As far as they might turn and believe something different, they might do a thing, but like their behavior, I think, is one of the things that doesn't go away. Like my parents' son. I always joke that I'm a stupid rule following hobbit, because I was raised by I turn signal in parking lots. I can't they're like, well, that's the way you're supposed to do it.
That's just good etiquette.
That's the way you're supposed to do it. Like that's how I was raised. You pay all your bills on time and you do all the things that that's just my parents. That's all the stuff that comes from him. It's not like, obviously they didn't create me, like they couldn't possibly have tried to create this version of whoever I became, but like all the base stuff, all the baseline stuff is always there, I think, with everybody. It's like, there's just behavior, like being polite to people, and I've still been in a relationship for a really long time because our family does monogamy pretty well. And, just little things like that, that you've modeled after your parents.
Yeah. It's funny how that is sort of seeing those similarities, despite all the, religious or ideological differences, sort of reveals how little of your character those beliefs actually comprise. Like, you are so much more than just your beliefs or your, political opinions. Although it's easy to get into that mindset in your 20s, and, seeing kids who have no beliefs whatsoever, about grander things anyways, but have very, very distinctive personalities, is sort of a point of sanity almost. And it brings you back down to, oh yeah, there's a lot more to not just to other people, but to myself than whatever differences of opinion we might have.
No, interesting. So what do you guys think are some of the biggest surprises and difficult challenges you've had from becoming fathers?
Sleep deprivation. Absolutely. If you've never experienced weeks or months of inadequate sleep, you don't understand how much that can break you. That's rough.
It's funny
that
you
was,
say
that
that
was a
'cause
surprise.
When I got married, I asked my dad, I'm like, do you have any advice? And he just looked at me. He goes, endure to the end. I was like, endure what? Like, what's left? I made it. I got married. Gonna have some kids. And then here I am with, 12 years into having kids. And I'm just like, oh, this is exhausting. This is what he's talking about. Like, I got however many more years of this, assuming that they even launched, like they might get stuck in my house and never get out of here and have to take care of them the rest of my life. Like, I don't know. But yeah, endure to the end.
Boy. Yeah, it's an endurance game. It really is.
Yeah, no, totally. I don't know if I was just lucky or if I was just absolute garbage at sleeping before. The sleep deprivation train didn't hit me, but I think that's just because I didn't sleep prior to that much, anyways. So
too many Monster energy drinks.
Among other things, yes. Mostly just coffee, but for me, I guess I've always liked having fewer things. Like I enjoyed living out of a semi truck over the road because everything was consolidated and out of the way. And if there's too much stuff around, I will just start throwing things away if it's my own stuff. With kids, tidiness and cleanliness and coordinating, cleaning stuff becomes, with two people, it's extremely doable. With two people and a kid, it's like one other thing to juggle. With two people, two adults and two kids, it's you are now negotiating with chaos itself. To have some downtime where you are not scrubbing, crayon off the wall or, pulling 37 stickers off the tile or, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. I got to add a point of surprise that maybe it's because I'm a big softie, but the amount, like the power of the love that you could feel for a person, someone that's outside of yourself, someone that's not your spouse, like this thing that you created. And like my parents always said, we love you, but you can never understand how powerful that is until you have your own kids. And it's kind of one of those things that comes back around. You're like, sure, whatever, love, okay, whatever. And then you have a kid and you're like, oh, I'd kill all of you for him. Like the motivation there is
all those evil plans you got to do to keep your kids safe.
I got a book.
Like, oh, if this guy does that, he's out.
Yeah.
You have the shovel ready.
Yeah, it's so funny how quickly that switch flicks, and you're like, oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, old mate next door. Oh, he's gone. And one wrong look, out of here.
It's so funny that I was about to figure out how I was going to phrase my own disagreement with what you were saying until you said I would kill for them, and I'm like, that's exactly right. That's totally correct. And I think it's actually a point of, and I haven't totally mastered the art of relating this to my wife, but women very much express love in just adoration and just like, oh, you're so cute and stuff, and they expect other people to express love in that way as well. And men's love is no less intense, no less real, but it's different in like what it's preparing you to do. I'm not preparing to feed this child with my body. It just doesn't work that way. I will do all kinds of other things, though. I will jump in front of a car. I will grab a gun and a shovel and a tarp. I will do all kinds of things, for this child. But 90% of those things you never actually get to do. Don't have to do is maybe the better way of putting it. But like,
I would say haven't done for the legal things.
Well, naturally.
Yeah, like,
very important.
Have absolutely not done it at all. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
It's that I do think that's it's common to a very large number of guys who are not felons, right? who all have this same experience of the things I would do to protect the people that I love. And when you don't have the opportunity or the need to protect them, it ends up unexpressed. I don't want to say bottled up, but it's very easy for wives to look at their husbands and think, you don't love the kids as much as I do you? And you're like, oh, you
just haven't had a chance to show it.
I literally don't have the means of showing you how wrong you are.
I think that comes back to a little bit of like we talked about in the group earlier in the week as well with that Cam Hanes, men don't need love as much as they need respect, which I think is more of an action oriented feeling or affection or whatever you want to call it. But it also comes back to, being action oriented and how so many men will say, oh, I'd take a bullet for my kid or my wife or spouse or whatever. But how many of them would change their lives and be better for them? And that's something I get a little bit rankled about because I work in the world of trying to help people be better. And so people be like, oh, I do anything for my kids. I'm like, so put down the donut.
Anything?
Pick up the weight.
Yeah.
Go for a walk. Like, be better. Don't just like think about the theoretical, like I'd stop a bullet from, like you wouldn't be able to get in front of that bullet in your current state. Be better. And that's another way I think that fathers show love is by being capable, in case we do need to make people disappear or whatever happens in the woods stays in the woods.
Exactly. Well, and as Josh says, I think the cool thing about that is that in my own limited experiences with this, the best fathering moments have just been me going about doing my own thing. I'm just doing what I normally do, but with the kids around and they're watching, and sometimes they want to participate. So I'll be out in the backyard, I'll be lifting weights or sunbathing or doing pull-ups. And, my daughter will come up and she wants to be on the pull-up bar too. I'm like, okay. So the third time we tried this, I lifted her up and set her on and I was like, now hold on as long as you can. And she recited the whole alphabet. She was a 3 at the time, minus N. So 25 letters instead of 26. But still, she did essentially a 25-second dead hang just because, daddy was doing it too. And they want to do that as well. And my son will be wandering around carrying bricks because I've been recently doing a lot of farmers carry stuff. And they just want to do what you're doing. So if you are taking care of yourself, if you're taking care of the house, if you're, my wife's always cooking. So my daughter will be cooking with Legos, making soup for everyone or coffee for me because she knows daddy drinks coffee. And they just, if you live a good life and take care of yourself and take care of things, you're already setting them up on a good path. And so, but as the father, you sort of set the model for that.
Yeah. It's more, I guess, emulative as opposed to you're not giving and doing things for as much as including and enacting what needs to be done. And then they join in. And I see that with my son all the time too. And he knows how to use a drill and an impact driver better than I did until like 5 years ago, and he's 2.5. So I'm like, cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I knew what an impact driver was until I got my job delivering exercise equipment when I was like 30. So like
everybody should have an impact driver.
No, they're fantastic
pieces of power.
Absolutely.
But what you were saying is also relevant in the sense that a lot of people, it's really easy to say really dramatic things that you'll never have to do. And a lot of people say, say all kinds of, I mean, met my dogs, I'll go, John, work on your ass, but and I mean it, but I'm thinking it, but it's probably not going to happen. I'm probably not going to actually go through and do like this, hey, I don't have to train you to do that anyway, but there's not going to be all this gunplay if something happens to my dogs. There's going to be a lot of me being angry. And so I think it's easy for a lot of people to say dramatic things that they'll never have to do. But to your point, Josh, actually doing something that they can do every day that creates a positive influence is actually kind of harder for a lot of people, because it's doing something instead of saying something.
Yeah, and it also prepares you in case, in the 1 in a billion chance that you might have to do something that is outside the usual, outside the norm. You are at least somewhat prepared for that. I mean, isn't that sort of why most men lift weights or train combat sports or learn firearms or learn how to hunt, is because there's a part of us that just maybe shit's going to hit the fan and we may have to use this. So we learn it, even though we probably won't.
Well, and also to Jack's point about, I'm going to do all these horrible things. Aside from it being kind of an evasion from a sort of compensation for the regular things you aren't doing, having kids also forces you to think in much more realistic terms about what you're actually going to do as well. Because, as a single guy, who is only responsible for yourself, you can actually seriously entertain doing some pretty crazy things, because it will only hurt yourself usually. But like, suppose one of your kids got really badly injured by someone and you did the full thing and you wound up in prison. Like that's going to have a negative effect on your other kids. Now you're not there for them too. It forces you to think in, as a over-the-road truck driver, I suppose I was kind of technically homeless, but like single guys can entertain and even go through with crazy risks, where it's like, if this doesn't work out, I'll just live on the street, or, that's a risk I'm willing to take. You can't do that kind of thing, or at least not very responsibly, if you have a spouse and kids that you are responsible for caring for. It forces you to think a lot more realistically about what your options are, and what you can and can't do, and say in some situations. I know I was flying a little close to the sun before, in talking about the way that men feel, which I think is true and universal, but in what you can actually do. You hear guys all the time who, before were just piss and vinegar. It's revolt, it's rebellion. And then when they have kids, like, I can't do this nonsense. I have, responsibilities that are more important than this crazy idea.
But even aside from children, like, that's sort of a natural progression into adulthood to an extent, and passage of time. Like, it was just when you were talking there about being in the trucks, like, oh yeah, like every once in a while I'll look back fondly into my memory bank of these, months where I just was living out of the back of a, Mazda Protege in Minnesota on the advent of winter. And I'm living out of the parking lot of where I was working and going to jiu-jitsu 6 days a week and showering there and eating cereal and canned goods because it's all that would stay in the car. And like, those were the days, what? There's going to be a tornado? Go park under the bridge. Like, just like look back and I'm like, that would fucking suck now. That would just be the worst. But back then it was like, yeah, this is fine. And, because you have those extra people that you have to really think about, and you have to you're responsible for them. And I think duty and responsibility are big drivers for men in particular. So it's just funny. I think, even being, if you're, say in your 40s, that scenario would probably sound awful anyway, even if you didn't have kids. But, I think that's a bit of a becoming an adult thing as well, or just passage of time growing up.
Well, and just, I think being an adult, you start to realize young men tend to have really bad assessments of like long-term consequences. Like what's going to happen? Like what are the third and order effects of what's going to happen? Like, I'm going to do this thing. Did you know what 10 years in prison is going to feel like? Actually, well, that guy's just going to sue you and you're not going to have any money for the next 20 years. Or like all the other things that could go wrong that you think about as you're older, because all of the consequences of things. You can't just, like run you. You're going to run your mouth and blah, 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 blah for this, and this. Okay. Well, here are all the things that are going to happen after that. And as an older man, you kind of you've seen your friends go down the wrong road or do the wrong thing or like whatever, and you've seen what actually happens, or you're just more aware of like what the consequences of actions are.
Experience.
You know? Yeah.
And it's funny because you do acquire that if you're, above a certain intelligence level, just naturally over time. But at least for me, I don't know how much of that like somewhat romantic and foolhardy passion I would still have if I was single. As far as the effects that fatherhood has on you as an individual, as before, you can have this maturity without being a father, without fatherhood, but fatherhood does drag you into that a little bit faster. And it makes men more mature. Not perfectly and not all the time, but more often than not, I think.
It's really good just for men generally to have structure and responsibilities. Most men, I mean, there are a lot of men who just don't know what to do with themselves. Like that's actually most guys. They don't know what to do with themselves. I'm a very creative person. Obviously, like I always say that like I can't actually get bored. There's so many things that I should be doing. I can procrastinate, but there are so many things that I could potentially do that I will never run out of things to do. But for a lot of people, they don't have that. And a lot of guys, they need some structure and responsibility and a place to go and a purpose and a thing to do. And kids provide that. Like a kid in a family provides that. Like I need to be home by X amount of time. I can't just sit at the bar all night. I knew guys who used to get a girlfriend specifically to keep them out of bars. Because otherwise they would just be out in the bar getting in trouble, and all kinds of stuff because they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know. Whereas like once you have kids, like that goes away for a lot of people because you can't do that because they're these little people that depend on you that are right there. You can't just be a mess. You have to figure it out, and some people are still messes, but like, it seems like for a lot of guys, it's really, I don't want to say civilizing in a bad way, but like it's a very civilizing thing, and where it's very productive thing. It forces them to be more productive and more focused, and not just like spin their wheels, because that's what a lot of guys will just do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Not saying like therapy is the reason that you should become a father, but it definitely has that effect, or can.
Yeah.
If you're
just not even therapy, but just responsibility, because men need responsibilities. It's in the way that you people always tell me that I raised my dogs wrong, and they're right. But you need to give a dog something to do. It has to have a job. It has to have like things to do and whatever, because that's what it's made to do. Men are kind of made to have a job, and if they don't have a job, then they're like, well, they're just a mess.
It's chaos.
Exactly. Most guys really need that.
Well, as far as men go, maybe responsibility is more therapeutic than therapy, which is closer to torture than
probably. That's actually a really interesting phrase to say. I can imagine a therapist that would be horrified by that, because it threatens their income. But like the
conversation.
No, I mean I think that's real. I think that's real for a lot of that'll fix a lot of problems. A place to go and a thing to do will fix it. That's why a lot of young guys join the army, or like why they join the military. They need to be told when to get up, told when to go to bed. This is what you do, and then it gives them a place to advance in life, like it through a very methodical way. So I think it's very positive.
Yeah, it gives them meaning and purpose. There was someone, it wasn't Jordan Peterson, but it was someone else who was telling a story about. No, it was Cameron Haynes. In fact, talking about a bunch of men who were in some ward. They were like catatonic. They were psychologically damaged for whatever reason. When the bombing happened, when the Germans bombed London, and these men who had been unresponsive and not speaking literally came out of their cells to go and find and became functional again in the face of danger. It's because now they had a responsibility to their city. If that isn't, therapy for men in action, I don't know what is.
That's such a mind-blowing story. Like, I remember it must have been a clip that went around this last week or so. I was hearing that, and I was just like, wow. And I mean, there's good and maybe not so good that can be taken out of that. I don't know if you guys have seen Watchmen, but the idea of something out there for people to put their effort against also creates drive and purpose and unity. And, you know, something that big, like everybody'd have to step up. And that's kind of the preppers, you know, wet dream, sitting there going like, one day something's going to happen and I'm going to have to step up. So now I've got 10 years worth of food in my basement. Because people are looking for, like, men are looking for something, like, even if they can't have actual responsibility and structure, they're looking for a fantastical or, you know, imaginary potential for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Totally. But even without, you know, your city being literally bombed, you know, for most men, I think seeing, you know, a small, helpless little person who's also a part of you, like that's responsibility enough. You know, no dire threat to the country or to your city, no, you know, axe murderer chasing down helpless people, but just this small helpless person, that's enough to get you some that sense of responsibility and obligation that drives men to action.
Yeah, well, so many. I mean, if you guys have watched my AMAs, what I do when I'm on Instagram, literally every time I get like 2 or 3 guys who are coming in with like, how do I find meaning and purpose in life? It is a huge question that I get all the
children.
time. Yeah, that's what I mean. That's it. You're like, because that'll be there. There you go. You'll have a whole bunch of problems that are created for you to solve, right?
Perfect.
You know, like they're going to have things to do. You know. Yeah. But that really is an answer for a lot of people. It's kind of a flippant answer, but it's not wrong. You know, it's like, well, if they have a kid, they'll figure some stuff out. You know, like they won't have all this. Well, I mean, that's the thing about like the modern world. I mean, yeah, with, you know, psychotherapy is a new thing because people had enough time to sit around and navel gaze and wonder about like their feelings and whatever. Whereas like, you know, previously you'd be a dad with like 7 kids working a farm, and you didn't sit around and thinking about like,
yeah,
what am I? Who am I? And how do I feel? You know, like there wasn't what was happening, you know?
Well, the question, how do I find meaning in life, comes from a very self-conscious place, and you have to have time to be thinking in that way. And it's a product of a lot of dwelling on yourself to ask that question in a persistent manner, assuming someone isn't just thinking, oh, I want to ask Jack a question. But with kids, you don't have that time. Your attention is already being drawn to other places. You are being drawn out of yourself in that place of dwelling on what is my purpose? What am I even doing with my life? It's like, oh no, we need to do the dishes and we need to clean the floors. And after a while, you develop a system where things are actually relatively stable, relatively clean-ish, and things are working, and the kids are happy, and the wife is happy, and you're like, this is great. And there's no self-consciousness in there until that moment of, oh, we're making it work, which is and at that point, what is my meaning in life it's like not a question that arises.
Well, you have to live so much in the moment. You know, it's all those things are happening around you, and you have to be like right here, present now, to make sure that it all stays functioning and in order. So you don't even get that chance.
That's just meditation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are you saying that fatherhood creates mindfulness? Is that way?
The other way of putting that is that mindfulness is what guys who aren't fathers do to compensate.
Ooh, that's a good take.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of that question that you get asked, Jack. And of course, you know, we could say, just be a dad. Like go make kids, be a dad. But I think everybody that I've even recommended that to or mentioned that to who isn't already in some sort of long-term relationship, you know, they're like, I'm not ready. And I know people in their like 30s are like, oh, I'm not ready yet. I'm kind of like,
no one's ready.
You'll never be ready.
No. Although I will say that like my wife and I, we did put it off for a number of years specifically because we're like, well, there's a lot of stuff we want to do, a lot of places we want to go. And we kind of have this timeline. So we need to go do those things now, live abroad, travel, study, that kind of stuff. So that we can then just be like, okay, cool. We've got stuff. We've done stuff. For me, a big thing was I wanted to have stories and life experience to teach my children. And, I see like people who have kids young, and like there's pros to that. Obviously being young is useful when it comes to dealing with children. But at the same time, I'm like, but what can they teach? What stories can they tell if they've never, left their hometown, if they've just got out of high school and they just have kids and like, that's it. That's what they do. And then they live that American dream where you just work until you're 65, retire, and then you get to live. Right. And that's from the get-go for me was like, that ain't going to fly. And so I went out and I tried to find experience so that I had something to teach, specifically because I wanted to have something to teach, to tell my kids. But at the same time, it's never enough. You're never still like ready.
So this begs a question that because there's a piece of this puzzle that's missing in order for this, to get from A to C, I guess the C being children. That was convenient. I didn't plan that.
That was good.
But the C being children, there's a woman that has to happen in their middle, which I think is what a lot of the men are struggling with. And I'll add something that I think is good advice that I gave someone, a young friend of mine. Listen, broad children, but good. Yeah, as far as the advice goes, but I'm really going to ask you guys, what do you think? What are some of the good qualities that you think you picked right in finding a woman? And I know that's not the one, because there are a lot of like psychotic strippers that have those. But I mean, one other thing, honestly, I heard the other day, and this is not to be a mother, but just to be someone. I feel like I did this in my own life, and I heard someone say it as far as picking a wife, and I think it's just generally is that pick someone cheerful. There's people who have cheerful dispositions, and people who don't. And I heard somebody give that advice to a young man, and a friend of mine, I was having lunch with him the other day, and I was like, that's what's kind of worked out for me, because the guy I live with, like, out in the kitchen washing dishes, like do, like like you can't be mad at that. Like you can't be like, oh, my life is miserable. It's just, and I think like a lot of guys who've had a good luck if they picked a woman that is cheerful, like that wants to be happy, because some people don't want to be happy. And then that's a problem. But what are some of the qualities that you think, made you decide like, hey, this is a good person, or were you looking for whatever to actually have a family with? Because that's the broad that comes before children. That you need that piece of the puzzle, because that's what a lot of guys. I mean, you ask them like, hey, you need responsibilities, go have kids. With who? Like is a big question. So maybe speak to that a little bit.
Well, not to be too obvious, but someone that loves kids. I mean, hopefully you dated them long enough or with them long enough to see them with kids. They want to be around kids. They want their own kids. Because I have friends that have wives that they hate their own kids. And it's like, well, they hated kids before. So why try to start a family with that person?
For sure.
Yeah, legit. Honestly, I think that's such a big thing. To make a really long story short, like I've been with my wife for almost 15 years now. We met in a hostel in Scotland. We were both backpackers. So it's like, it's just kind of, we just happened to meet out backpacking. But I kind of just knew, because like, for me, like if you're looking at having a life with someone, they have to have the same ideals, the same interests, and a same potential for the future. And I've always wanted to have kids eventually, and that sort of nourishing, like nurturing motherly interest in children. And like, that's so essential, I think, to finding a mother for your future children. Like, obviously you have to be compatible in other ways, and you have to find them attractive to even talk to them. But like, when you find someone who's like off the bat, I'm like, oh, you would be a wonderful mother. Not only do I find you attractive, not only do I want to do all the fun stuff with you, but like, oh, like you're worth investing in. And understanding that process, building a real relationship, creating a family takes effort and work. Most people just bail. Like, yeah, you're a good investment, but there's a lot of fish in the sea kind of thing. It's like, just no, invest in the good things that you find. And so that's why I moved to Australia, from the US. And so having someone that has that potential along with those common interests, spend the time investing and building the relationship instead of just expecting it to be like, cool, perfect. It's like a fairy tale. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, totally. I agree with both of those. The thing I would add is, when I think about the other, marriage relationships I know in my personal life, there isn't really one rule that describes all of them, except all the ones that work. The couple like each other. And, as far as being a good parent, kids are sponges. They pick up if their parents hate each other. They'll pick up if the parents kind of are just tolerating each other and don't communicate. The most important thing is to find someone who clicks with you and who likes you and who you like. Anyone who knows me will probably find it the least surprising thing in the world to know that I met my wife at debate club in college.
That really sounds like it shouldn't work, but go ahead.
It's yeah. Well, I guess you could take it either way, but it's worked out so far, and the downside to that is you have high odds of ending up with, young daughters who do not stop talking ever. But, small price to pay. Hopefully it becomes more sensible as they get older. It's but yeah, if you like each other enough to be able to speak directly and honestly with each other, because so many problems with both parenting and with relationships, it's one of those cliches we started talking about at the beginning, comes down to communication. Comes down to not being direct and sincere and upfront with each other. That can solve almost any problem.
Chris, can I ask a quick question? With your meeting of your wife and your proposal, were you just, when you proposed, you're just like, present me with a good argument why you shouldn't marry me?
I should have done that.
Missed opportunity, man.
What if she would have won?
Then it wasn't meant to be.
I guess not. Yeah. Well, who's taking which side in that debate becomes the real question.
Yeah, it does seem like there's also a thing that people go through where, like you said, you have to invest in it, and I think that's people have they don't realize that, because I used to call it being very California, just because I lived there for a while. But if you live in a place like Los Angeles, there's an infinite number of possibilities. So, and you'd see it. It's also kind of a Seinfeld thing too. Like it was kind of a joke on that show for a long time. Like there would just be something, it'd be any random thing. It'd be like, I don't know if I like this thing that they do one time, and then they'd like fixate on it. And I'm like, that's not the one. And, they'd find some little reason to exchange it out for the next person. And, obviously if you're going to invest in something, you kind of have to decide like, there's going to be some little annoying things. There's going to be this and that, but you have to be like the big picture and invest in the big picture, not just constantly looking for the next thing to trade out to, which seemed to me at the time when I was, younger, it seemed to be like the LA thing. Like you're just going to upgrade. You get bored and you just upgrade. And that's, but obviously you can't have any kind of stability in life if you do that.
Yeah. And you're missing out on the deeper kind of enjoyment that comes from commitment. As my wife has become fond of saying, you can't play test commitment. And, the fun of your late teens, early 20s, where every guy has had the experience of believing that they're in love. And then it's like, all the older guys in their life just laugh at them when they get their heart broken. And it's like the cruelest thing ever, but it's also the most necessary thing. Cause then that guy who hates all their friends for several months, they meet someone and they're actually with them for years, and they develop a like a deep kind of knowledge that their partner has of them too. And you can't have even imagined that, but you can't get there through some superficial evaluation of like a checklist.
Right.
You can't say, oh, like this person doesn't like sushi, so like they're clearly off the list.
Right, for sure. It's yeah. But,
Yeah, that's early days stuff. Like once, like you just need the initial attraction, and then you have to deep dive you have to learn each other, and it's study almost. Like you're learning another person, they're learning you, and then together you're creating something completely different. And if you don't get to that stage where you're becoming sort of your own little entity, you'll never find someone if you can't at least work up to that point.
Yeah,
that takes investment and effort
and negotiation too, which is playtesting for kids, because kids' needs are very concrete, and some of your time will go away to do things that they need. And you'll be like, well, I had wanted to read this book, but I guess I'm making paper airplanes for the next hour and a half. So that's kind of fun too. So, we'll do that.
Oh, that's one of the best parts, is like enjoying very simple things that are incredibly new to them, and you being like, oh shit, yeah, this is cool, I forgot about that. And they're like, check out this leaf, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I'm like, that is a cool leaf. And just absolutely re-experiencing life. Like it's kind of like a second childhood, but now you get to look at it with adult eyes and be like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah. And also, stop knocking over my Lego structure, kid.
They always do that. We're building shit, and then he's like, haha, knocked yours over. I'm like, I just spent 10 minutes building this. What are you doing?
No, seriously, that is like one of the best parts. Not them knocking it over, but like that's just
that's funny too. Yeah.
Well, that's because you have to go spank their mom again when they do it.
That's right. That's right. What's this for? Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Well, before we get too far, we've actually already hit an hour, but this has been really good, and I think what everybody was kind of hoping it would be. I guess I should wrap up a little serious and say, like, what are some of the biggest values that you're trying to share? Because to be honest, obviously we're in a different context to where we're doing this with the in the context of our group and so forth. And, you hear so many people are like, nobody has morality without the Bible. And you have, when it has, any good messages, people like, as if people were just beating the shit out of their kids and just being horrible people for the rest of human history, which of course it didn't care about their kids, whatever, which is of course not true. But like, what are some of the messages that I think that are important to you that you're trying to like send down the chain?
I guess I'll go first. Mm-hmm. I would say, I mean, there's an infinite list, and all of them are going to be relevant to different people. But for me, it's been care for the stuff around you, care for your own body and space. Our daughter just, was roiling around and fell off the couch and ripped a cable out of our sound system and broke it. And, we didn't punish her or anything. We just kind of forced her to acknowledge what had happened and said, you got to be more careful with these things. And when it finally dawned on her that she'd actually broken the sound system for the TV, she was crying inconsolably for like 5 minutes, which we didn't want to happen. And she went back to roiling around after that. But like their position, just being aware of what's around them, and that's kind of situational awareness is in many ways like the line that separates kids from adults. I mean, that line, that awareness becomes more abstract into time and further out beyond just 10 feet into my country, my broader community, and so forth. But the thoughtlessness of children is simultaneously what makes them so charming and fun and goofy to play with, but also it's what causes them to hurt each other and themselves. And teaching that has been a challenge, and it, like, seeing it brings up your own, like, oh shoot, I wasn't aware that our dishwasher needs to be cleaned, or that, your own failures of situational awareness too. So that kind of awareness has been a big theme.
Cool.
That's awesome. I actually really, really like the wording of that and how you're going about that. Two big ones for me are capability and resilience. My kid's 2.5, like complex things are tricky. Like we try to make sure he's actually care for environment's really big, because my wife runs a bush school and bush play group. And so like not just killing all the bugs he finds and things like that is a big thing. But capability, like just because he's been spending basically the majority of his waking hours outside since he was born, like his ability to use his body to climb and crawl and pick up and throw, and he was climbing over rocks and logs before he could walk, and just like that being a capable person interacting with your environment is such a rarity these days. It becomes a specialized sport with like MoveNat and Animal Flow and stuff like that. But like people being capable of just manipulating the environment around them is rare, and especially in kids, they just sit all day. And so that's been a really big thing for us, and it's just awesome to see. Just so cool to see him, like, just put him out in the bush anywhere and he'll just run off and climb a tree and flip over some logs and look for scorpions and shit. Wild kid. But then the other side of that is resilience, because he has to survive that. And so just being like totally aware that he's gonna be covered in scratches and bruises if he chooses to do this, and he's okay with that. Be like, yep, brush it off, brushes his little knees off and gets up, and sure, there's a bit of blood and a scratch, and maybe we slap a leaf on that. But just like resilience and capability are just important things with how we want to live our lives as well, but like things that we're trying to instill with him at this young age.
Awesome.
I'd say for us, we're doing a lot of lately. It's been like a lot of decision making skills. If you make this type of decision, this is kind of the road you go down. This is where you end up. And if you make a better decision, whether it's right now they're doing a lot of sports, so we're doing a lot of health type stuff. A lot of what does it take to be that next tier of player? Because they both play competitive soccer, and one of them does basketball as well. And so it's like we're doing a lot of like, respect for the sport, respect for your teammates, and just building through that. And then the same thing off that respect thing. I'm raising daughters, respect for themselves. Like eventually I'm not always going to be there. Dad's not going to be there to do those extreme things or whatever it takes to keep them safe or keep them on a good path. They got to make decisions for themselves and eventually align themselves with a partner that'll help them get there to reach whatever goals it is that they have. And so that's kind of decision making, respect. That's been our thing lately.
Nice. So that's one of the things I get little tidbits about what my sisters do, because my sisters are now they're just only a few years younger than me. So my sisters have kids that are going to college. So they've gone through the whole cycle. I remember one of the things my sister Kelly always used to say, because she's kind of into health. She runs marathons and stuff like that. She's on that kind of train. And she's like, I don't tell them what they can't eat and what they can't eat. I tell them what good decisions are and what bad decisions are. And it's kind of like you can make whatever decision you want, but this is the good decision. This is the bad. This is what's good for you. That's what's bad for you. And kind of like, it kind of tries to guide them in that general direction rather than everything being a no or a yes.
Right.
But like, you could have that. It's kind of gross. You shouldn't do it. But, just kind of like sending them down that path, which I always thought was kind of a good way to handle that.
Well, and it's funny too, because when they get to that point and they're like, I know this is terrible for me, but I don't care. And then they eat it anyway. And you're like, well, it's your decision. We talked about it, so.
Right.
And then they've
Part
been
of raising
primed.
adults.
So then when they experience that negative experience later on, they know exactly why.
Yeah.
Exactly. Cool, guys. Well, this has been a really good conversation. I think that we'll probably end up doing it again at some point, because we do have a lot of, obviously people don't know a lot of the guys who are in the Order of Fire, but like half the guys or more are all dads, and a bunch of them came up with questions for this group, for this podcast, and I think there'll be some more of it. So we like to go back and forth between discussing the finer points of the Rig Veda and Homer and stuff like that, to the things that actually are present in everyday life that we all actually deal with, and the challenge that everybody has. And you can't really talk about the father archetype without actually dealing with what the nuts and bolts of the actual father job is. The not the super high one on the mountain, but the one that actually has to raise kids. So it's good to actually to take that apart and really get into that a little bit. And I thank you guys for joining me on this and digging into that for the first time. So awesome, guys. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. This is fantastic. So stay solar.
Stay solar.
Pater is the cultural arm of the Order of Fire. For more, visit PH2T3R.com.